Hello again, everybody. Welcome into Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips joined by Chris Clark, and it's been a very exciting week for Gamecock football fans. A lot of action going on with the hire of Will Muschamp and immediate efforts to not only assemble Coach Muschamp's staff, but efforts recruiting as well. And those efforts seem to have focused primarily in-state so far. Chris, how you doing this morning?
Doing well. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, appreciate you taking time to join us. I know you got a full plate this week. Talk about Will Muschamp and his in-state recruiting efforts. You know, I've been reading on Gamecock Central this week about all of these recruits from within the state of South Carolina that Coach Muschamp and Coach Elliott have already been to visit. Seems like this is priority one, obviously, is reaching out to kids that are playing high school football in South Carolina. And they even paid a visit to Tavian Feaster, who has been a strong Clemson commit for quite some time. And, Chris, it seems like that was kind of a statement move, for lack of a better way of putting it, on the part of Coach Muschamp and his staff.
That's a perfect word to describe it. A lot of what's being done is a statement, right? I mean, of course, they have to go out and really pound the pavement, and they've got to try to fill out this class, and not just fill it out, but get players that can help this team win in the future. But I think a lot of what's being done is to send a statement to Gamecock fans that, hey, we, being the staff, we are going to work hard. We are going to pay a lot of attention to in-state prospects. That doesn't mean that they're going to offer all of them. But that if there are good players in the state, that they are going to make those guys a priority and try to keep them in state, keep them home. And number two, look, frankly, South Carolina hasn't been as much of a presence on the recruiting trail in state or out of state in the past couple years, really. And so they're sending a message that, look, we are going to be, you know, I don't want to say a force to be reckoned with, but it's not going to be easy to recruit against this staff. There's going to be effort. There's going to be, you know, hard recruiting and things of that nature. So, you know, going up to see Tavian Feaster, I mean, are they going to flip him? It's highly unlikely, in my opinion, from where I'm sitting. But going up there and stirring the pot a little bit and showing every other program that in the Southeast that, you know, hey, we're not afraid to go recruit guys and recruit good players. I mean, that should be a starting point for anyone. But frankly, it hasn't been done as much lately. And so, I mean, look at some of the rosters across the country, especially in the Southeast, and you'll see a lot of players from areas that South Carolina typically draws from, and especially in-state. There's some guys that South Carolina could have taken that are really helping other teams, and for some reason South Carolina didn't take those guys. And look, that's fine. Sometimes good players get out of state. But if you're not going to take those guys, you have to make sure you're getting a better player from out of state, and that's been part of the problem. There are several players from on other rosters that could have gone to South Carolina, would have had interest, but, you know, for whatever reason, they weren't recruited as hard, they were slow played, whatever it may have been. And so I think this new staff is showing that they're going to prioritize good players.
Yeah, Christian Miller at Alabama, Mason Rudolph, quarterback at Oklahoma State, a couple of in-state products that come to mind, you know, that might have considered going to South Carolina, but there just didn't seem to be a lot of heavy recruitment by those players on behalf of the previous Gamecock staff. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but the perception seems to be that maybe the Gamecock staff in the last couple of years got a little bit lackadaisical and maybe rested on their laurels a little bit after winning 11 games 3 consecutive years. That seems to be the perception, and it looks like Will Muschamp and his staff are working very quickly to try to change that.
Well, I think the way you put it is very accurate, and it's something that while Sean Elliott was the interim head coach, he stood up in a press conference and said it, and I thought it was sort of refreshing for him to say that the staff rested on its laurels a little bit. There are a lot of components to that. I mean, you know, some decisions that were made, you can look back and say, why did that happen? You can look back at the effort sometimes. You can look back at, you know, the fact that South Carolina from a recruiting personnel department standpoint is undermanned relative to, you know, Clemson, for example, and pretty much every other program they recruit against, with only a couple exceptions. The recruiting department is smaller. So those are things that, you know, like you said, they are having to rectify. But yeah, I mean, this is recruiting, and it is very competitive. So even if you win, make the SEC title game, and then in 2010, and then you win 33 games and only lose 6 the next 3 years, well, you got there for a reason. And if you take that reason away, which is recruiting, by and large, I mean, that's the biggest factor. That's the lifeblood of a program. Then you can't expect it to remain the same. This is recruiting, and guys don't just – it doesn't matter how good your school is. It doesn't matter if you're Alabama or whoever it may be. You don't just have guys beating down your door. Now, Alabama does have some, but they have to recruit very hard, and guess what? They don't get everybody either. They have people that decommit from them. They have guys that choose to go elsewhere. So it's a tough game, and if you're South Carolina, you don't have the tradition – of some of those other programs. So you have to do even better with your evaluations. And if you have good prospects in state that can play, that can make plays for you and help, then you've got to keep those guys in state, and you have to dip outside, and you have to give a ton of effort. And South Carolina did those things earlier and benefited from a good in-state run as well. And then it slipped, and then the product on the field slipped. I mean, it's not a magic formula, really. It's simple in the formula, in that you just have to recruit and coach well, but it's much harder to execute. So, the competition is stiff, and I think what South Carolina is showing is that, if they have any failures, it's not going to be for lack of effort.
Gamecock Central Radio, Emerson Phillips with Chris Clark here. This is day 4 for Will Muschamp on the job at South Carolina, and he and his staff working very hard, really hitting the ground running with recruiting. An important few weeks coming up for recruiting for Gamecock football. So Thursday update here. Chris, we've got the high school football state championship games coming up at Williams-Brice this Saturday. 3 state title games at Williams-Brice beginning at noon on Saturday, and this happens to coincide with what will be a tremendously important recruiting weekend for Gamecock football. And I think it's interesting that Fort Dorchester's playing for a state championship on Saturday, and John Simpson, the offensive lineman from Fort D, a player that we ran a piece on here on Gamecock Central earlier in the week, is uncommitted at this point, and he's got offers from everybody in the Southeast. He'll be playing at Williams-Brice on Saturday. And South Point is playing for the 3A state championship. Fort D, obviously a 4A school, but Chris Smith from South Point, already a Gamecock commit. Northwestern will be playing Lexington at 6 o'clock on Saturday. We know Northwestern has long time been a power in South Carolina, and they've got a handful of D1 prospects. So talk about the coming weekend here and what South Carolina's got planned for this weekend. A very unique set of circumstances when you consider the number of recruits that will be coming in to visit. Some of them will be playing in state championship games on Saturday right there at Williams-Brice.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned those 3 games. South Carolina has at least one prospect of interest in every single one of them. I mean, Fort D has Simpson, a guy who was very happy to hear that Sean Elliott was going to be staying on staff. I think that gives USC a fighting chance going forward, even though they've got some ground to make up. DeCarrion Joyner, the quarterback 2018 class, is certainly a guy to watch for the future. At Northwestern, you got Logan Rudolph, the 2017 tight end defensive end, who has an offer from the Gamecocks. And then South Point has numerous prospects. Nick McLeod, a senior defensive back who really sort of baffled me that he hasn't had more interest from programs. Good prospect, in my opinion, very good size, someone that Muschamp has already connected with, and an offer from him is possible. Then they have Chris Smith, who's been committed to South Carolina, and then some 2018 prospects highlighted by Darion Kendrick, who could be the best prospect to come out of South Point in quite a while, could play defensive back, could play wide receiver at the next level. Really talented prospect, and our understanding is that South Carolina is going to scout basically all those guys during Saturday. And then, they have a bunch of visitors coming in, not a whole bunch, and I think some of those we'll know more about prior to Friday. They're still trying to build that visitor list. But Brandon McElwain's one of them. Brian Edwards is another. They'll have a couple. Jamarcus King, 4-star junior college cornerback, who they jumped in on very quickly and were able to secure a visit. So they've got some key guys coming in this weekend, and it's going to be a balancing act between hosting those guys and scouting some prospects during the games.
Be sure to visit GamecockCentral.com for updates on all things recruiting, an important recruiting weekend coming up for Gamecock football. And if you come visit GamecockCentral.com, we'll have all the latest news and information for you right here on the site. We've got smartphone apps available, free apps for your phone that allow you to listen to Gamecock Central Radio on your phone. The Android app is out. The iPhone app is available. And we're also on iTunes. Simply search Gamecock Central Radio for all three. Emerson Phillips with Chris Clark, Thursday edition of Gamecock Central Radio here. And, Chris, talk about Will Muschamp's schedule for the remainder of the week. You mentioned, recruiting is obviously priority one, and we've seen that he's visited a number of kids from in-state already, and I imagine he'll continue to do that today and tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know all of the stops right now. As we confirm them, they'll be thrown up on Gamecock Central on the so-called Muschamp tracker, but definitely recruiting. I mean, the dead period is coming up next week, so these few days that he had between getting the job and being able to get on the road were absolutely crucial. And so recruiting has been the number one focus. He's balanced that with building his staff. Of course, there's some staff members in place already, and those guys have been on the road. But the biggest factor has been recruiting. I mean, there's a month-long dead period that hits starting next week where there's no on- or off-campus contact allowed. You can still make phone calls, speak on social media, message, things like that. But the in-person contact, as we know, is really big. And so they've really tried to take advantage of this recruiting window.
Chris, with the dead period, you said that social media contact is permissible. Will this be a daily type of thing for Gamecock coaches? They'll be reaching out to potential recruits and prospects on Twitter or whatever the case may be. How does the dead period work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can still have the phone call. You can still have, a big thing with recruiting now is direct messaging on Twitter. I mean, that's, when I talk to recruits, you hear that most of the time, that, you're direct messaging with coaches and getting the prospect to call you and things of that nature. So, yeah, it's something they can continue to do through the dead period. And then Muschamp will have a chance to sort of balance some other things, continuing to build the staff if it's not in place by the weekend, continuing to assess the current roster when he gets a chance. But look, even during the dead period, there's going to be a lot of recruiting going on, whether it's evaluating guys, continuing to try to get visits set up for January and getting closer to signing day.
Well, Chris, we know you're working hard to keep all of our Gamecock Central subscribers and viewers up to date on the latest with Gamecock recruiting and developments with this new staff that Will Muschamp is putting together. So thanks again for taking time to join us, and we look forward to hearing more from you very soon. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right, that's Chris Clark, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is Gamecock Central Radio. Big recruiting weekend coming up for the Gamecocks, and the high school football state championships will take place at Williams-Brice this Saturday as well. Hope you can make it out for that. And keep it right here to Gamecock Central Radio for more information on the new coaching staff and recruiting information. We'll have it for you as it becomes available. Thanks for joining us.